Shattered Dreams, an analysis of Canada's government economic crisis post-2015 from inflation to fiscal mismanagement. Who will pay for the rising cost of living for Canadians? Since the Trudeau Liberal government took office in 2015, it has faced criticism for its economic policies and their negative impact on the middle class. Despite promises of prosperity, the reality has been increased debt, soaring living costs, and rampant corruption and waste within the government. This video will explore how the mismanagement of the Canadian government since 2015 has exacerbated the country's economic issues, compare leadership models from other countries, and propose potential solutions. Part 1. Inflation, cost of living, and housing crisis. Inflation. Since 2015, inflation in Canada has worsened dramatically, with the national average home price rising from CAD 401,143 in January 2015 to CAD 685,230 in January 2024, an increase of approximately 70.8%. Food prices. 2015. The average monthly grocery cost for a family of 4 was round CAD 800.20 The average monthly grocery cost for a family of 4 has risen to 1,350 Canadian dollars. Since 2015, there has been a significant increase in food prices. For example, the price of a loaf of bread has risen from CAD 2.50 in 2015 to CAD 3.75 in 2024. The price of milk has risen from CAD 3.50 in 2015 to CAD 4.25 in 2024. A dozen eggs have risen from CAD 2.00 in 2015 to CAD 3.00 in 2024. The price of 1 kilogram of ground beef has risen from CAD 8.00 in 2015 to CAD 12.00 in 2024. The price of 1 kilogram of apples has risen from CAD 3.00 in 2015 to CAD 4.50 in 2024. The price of 1 kilogram of chicken breast has risen from CAD 7.00 in 2015 to CAD 10.00 in 2024. Note: these are average prices across Canada, with prices varying by region such as British Columbia, where prices are much higher. The food price index rose from 141.4 in 2015 to 180.8 in 2023, an increase of about 27.9%. The consumer price index CPI rose from 126.6 in 2015 to 153.1 in 2023, an increase of about 20.9%. leading to a significant increase in the overall cost of living. Housing crisis. Government's failure in managing the housing market is particularly evident. From 2015 to 2024, Canada accepted approximately 1,300,000 temporary residents and refugees, but without a corresponding housing plan, leading to skyrocketing rents. In 2015, the national average monthly rent was CAD 934. By January 2024, this figure had risen to CAD 2024. Absolute increase, CAD 1090. Growth rate, about 116.7%. Taxes. In 2015, the total federal tax revenue in Canada was 295 billion Canadian dollars. By 2023, this figure had grown to CAD 432 billion, an absolute increase of 137 billion Canadian dollars, a growth rate of about 46.4%. Last year, the expenditure on taxes for an average family accounted for 43% of their income. Between 2015 and 2024, Canada's major living expenses have risen dramatically, with housing costs, including buying and renting, seeing the most significant increase. This trend has severely impacted the quality of life and economic situation for many Canadians. Part 2. Fiscal uncontrol and tax pressure. Government overexpenditure. Starting in 2015, Canada's federal government spending increased sharply. During the 2015 election campaign, Trudeau promised a balanced budget by 2019. However, a deficit of 20 billion Canadian dollars had already emerged before the arrival of COVID-19. COVID-19 triggered a spending spree fueled by debt, with 576 billion Canadian dollars in new spending announced during the pandemic. However, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, 205 billion Canadian dollars of this new spending was for non-COVID-19 measures. According to the Financial Post, since COVID-19, the government's program spending has been 35% higher than before the pandemic. In 2023, per capita government spending was 27% higher than in 2019, reaching twice the average level of the past 40 years. Government overreach has led to a reduction in private sector investment, with Canada's productive capital stock declining by 1.5% in the past year. Canada's share of business capital expenditure is only 8% of GDP, the lowest in nearly 20 years. Continued fiscal expansion has led to a significant increase in government debt, which poses a long-term threat to economic development. Trudeau has doubled the federal debt. It took more than 24 prime ministers and a century and a half for the federal government to accumulate a debt of 616 billion Canadian dollars, which was the total debt before Trudeau took office. As of August 30, 2024, in less than 10 years, the Trudeau government has doubled the debt to 1.23 trillion Canadian dollars, still under the condition of a significant increase in government tax revenue. The federal government's debt interest expenditure exceeds 1 billion Canadian dollars per week. Now, the payment of debt interest absorbs every penny collected by the Goods and Services Tax (GST). According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's forecast, debt interest expenditure will reach 847 billion Canadian dollars in the next 15 years. This is equivalent to each Canadian bearing more than 18,000 Canadian dollars in debt interest. After a decade of fiscal mismanagement by the government, merely capping expenditure growth is not enough. Canadians need the government to truly cut spending. In 2024, the Trudeau government increased the capital gains tax, expecting to take an additional CAD 6.9 billion from taxpayers that year. However, with an expenditure plan of 535 billion Canadian dollars, the government will burn through this new tax revenue in just 5 days. Tax pressure from 2015 to 2023. Canada's taxes increased by 46.4%. The tax burden on an average family has risen to 43% of their income, greatly compressing the disposable income of middle-class families. At the same time, the government's redistribution policies, such as carbon taxes and corporate taxes, have further increased the burden on families and businesses. Although the government claims that these policies are to address climate change and promote social equity, the actual effects are questionable, especially for low and middle-income families. When the government raises taxes, it often uses tax credits as a cushion, promoting to the public that tax credits can alleviate the tax burden. However, tax credit policies usually come with strict conditions, and many middle-class families, due to slightly higher incomes, cannot enjoy these tax credit benefits. Compared with low-income families, the middle class often falls into the sandwich layer of tax credit policies. They neither enjoy benefits nor meet the conditions for tax credits, thus ultimately bearing more tax burdens. In addition, such tax credit policies are often temporary and cyclical, especially during election periods, when the government often introduces one-time tax credit measures to give out sweets to voters. This short-term tax credit policy only appears before elections, with the government using it to give voters a temporary sense of relief. But this sugar rush effect does not truly offset the high tax rates and living costs faced by the middle class in the long term. Therefore, tax credits are often seen as a political tool to win votes, rather than a systematic way to alleviate the tax burden on the middle class. After tax increases, tax rates often rise gradually, with tax credits being only occasional formal measures, making the tax burden on the middle class increasingly heavy.